Turn your phone on.
It's Thursday Night Live with your hosts, Dennis Wiles, Barry Rock, Kurt Grice, and Katie Hodges. Ladies and gentlemen, here's your hosts.
Well, good evening out there. And I got a 10 on the landing.
Nice.
We're so glad to be back with you all. I don't usually, we're changing platforms, and so I haven't really gotten to see our introduction very often. But they told Kurt and I to kind of ham it up in the video, the opening of this thing, and then what the heck? Dennis and Katie, they look like normal, everyday people you'd walk up to and talk to. We look like people you'd run away from.
They were somber morticians.
Hardly.
No offense, Mike Wade.
Hardly.
They were somber morticians. They were balancing our lively kind of energetic effervescence.
Well,
We're just taking this seriously is all I can tell you. You know?
There you go.
I don't know about that.
That was your first mistake, Pastor.
well, thank you for joining us tonight. And I was going to say, and for those of you that will join later, but that doesn't help you, does it? So those of you that are online with us right now, take a minute to share it. Now you can like it. You can subscribe to it. You can tell us what you like or don't like. You can be a part of the podcast tonight by giving us your questions or your thoughts, and we'll try to work those in. So as always, I'm joined by Katie Hodges. She is in my bottom right-hand corner. I'm not sure where she is on your screen.
She's in your corner.
Yeah, we're all in a corner. And she is over our college ministry and does so much at our church, and we value her greatly. Thank you for friendship and life together, Katie. You'll see Curtis Grice up there. He has spent a few days with his grandchildren, and so he is not worn out.
Yes,
Are
he
you?
is. Yes, he is.
Yes, he is.
It was
Okay.
awesome. I'm weary and well-doing.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us. He's one of my best friends in the world, and he is over our spiritual formations ministry at our church. That's our Bible study and all our education things. And then, as always, last week it was illustrious. This week it's auspicious.
Ooh, that's
Our
a good one.
auspicious
Whoa.
senior pastor, Dr. Dennis Wiles. How are you, sir?
Thank you. I'm doing very well. Thank you. You didn't say suspicious. What'd you say?
No, that's auspicious.
Auspicious.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. All right.
Well,
Yeah.
again, welcome to
Let me
everyone.
look that up. See what that means.
Yeah,
real quick.
get
Make sure I feel good
dictionary out.
about
Do
it.
that after the show because you may not like it.
Okay. All right. Okay. I'll wait.
Well, tonight we're going to be talking again about the subject matter from the sermon this past week. And so I hope that you had a chance to join in. That's one of the things that we told you last week we're going to do for a while is talk about the subject matter from the previous Sunday morning's devotional sermon. And our pastor this week talked about serving, talked about service. We hear that word a lot. As many words in our vocabulary today, it's gotten co-opted a bit. We don't necessarily like to apply it to ourselves, but we like it in other people.
Mhm.
We talk about the wait staff and the serving staff at restaurants. I used to go to those. We talk about getting good service on our different devices and broadband, and we talk about all kinds of, but what we've lost is a little bit of that root word of serve and servanthood, and so it's not applicable to only the things that we get or receive. It's also about what we send and deliver. And so tonight we're going to talk about service. So, Brother Pastor, would you care to give us just a brief overview of where we were last Sunday?
Yeah, it's funny. I was telling Kurt today, when I opened the sermon this past Sunday at our church, I told the story about I was flying home from New York, and a lady was sitting next to me on the plane from Australia. This was a couple of years ago, and she just said, "Have you noticed that that people in America, there are more and more people in America who don't speak English?" And I was like, "No, I don't really know that." And she said, "Well, I'm from Australia, and when you go to another country, you just pay attention to those kinds of things." And I said, "Okay." She said, "Particularly in the service industry." And I was telling Kurt just that phrase just struck me kind of funny, the service industry. And I mean, I know what she meant by that, but I thought, isn't that fascinating? And so that really gave me pause, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about that phrase, the service industry. And the more I think about it, that is our industry. If we're Christians, Jesus has called us to be servants, and he modeled that for us. And so I think that's why it's an important topic. It's one of those things though that's just fun to talk about, and I think it's the kind of thing that every once in a while when you do it, it's really fun to talk about. I'm not so sure though how effective we are at actually living it per se. So yeah.
So. As always, we just kind of are going to paw around in this particular area of being a servant and so if you're waiting on some hints to give to somebody else in your world about how they can be a better servant, you could ask them to tune in, or you might listen yourself just to figure out, like I'm going to, how I can serve better and be a better person and fill my position. So Katie, and I'm just going to say it like it is. We always ask for questions that you guys want to answer and stuff tonight. I will just say in front of everybody and their mother, Katie was the only one to supply me with questions. And so she's going to get the questions she's prepared for. And we got together and got some questions for you all that, well, they're just going to be really hard.
We're ready.
No, we
Such
didn't.
a servant.
We didn't do that.
You're welcome for my service to this group.
And so, servanthood in action tonight. It's a picture's worth 1,000 words. So, thank you, Katie. So, Katie, one of the questions that you sent me, I think it's a good place to start. What qualifies something as a service? What does that even mean?
That's a great question. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, you get softballs, not 95-mile-an-hour sliders.
No, I told Ryan, my husband Ryan, we were talking today, and he was like, "Well, this one should be super easy because service is kind of like it's a softball in itself. It's like just go do it, And I said, well, I threw out these questions, and he said, "Why do you have to get so philosophical about everything? Like, what is service? He's like, just go do it." But he also can philosophize anything. Anyway, all that to say, I do think defining it could be helpful. Just getting back to like the basic of what it is, and I think at the most common level, because like, is mowing my lawn service? Not necessarily. Not every act I do is service, but I think
you mowing my lawn is service.
And I think that,
especially if I don't pay you.
Yeah, and I think that's the bottom line. I think that's the bottom line, is something done on someone else's behalf or for someone else's good. I think mowing a lawn can be service, totally, if it's my neighbor that needs it or if it's to bless someone else. But not every action we do is service. It's when we do an action on behalf of someone else or for someone else's good. And certainly there's more Christian layers we could put on that. I think service is just us. When we serve, we mimic, we look more like Jesus, and so it draws us closer to Jesus in our doing. And so I think there's Christian service that's done kind of in the name of Jesus, but also helps us identify with him and his servanthood, helps us become more like we ought to be. Is that me? I don't know.
I don't know. Somebody is ruffling something. It sounds like a bag of Ruffles being eaten, but I don't know. That could be Andy. Katie, that's a great thought. One of the things that I thought from the questions that you sent to us tonight was adding on just a word. I think that we've also lost, if I could add on just a little bit, my thought, I think we've also lost a little in the translation because so much of our sense of service is transactional, is we do something in order to get it. And so part of it is that selfless stuff. And I don't know if that, I don't want to co-opt your meaning either, but part of it is doing something without desiring to get something in return. So that was just a thought on my mind as I was able to ponder your questions this evening. So
I think it really does have to have the other person's best in mind. I mean, if I serve just to get credit back, I guess maybe it's still service, but it's not the Jesus way kind of service that we're really aspiring to do and be.
That's great. Well, Kurt,
I'm just watching the Barry and Katie show. Y'all go ahead.
well,
It's really good though.
Yeah,
y'all
for
can
a host, we start talking a lot.
yeah, y'all can copy off our test if you want to. I mean, you should study. I mean, I give you the homework.
Dennis and I just expect you to throw something out there and say discuss. Ready.
Yeah, Kurt, talk about the Marine Corps. That's another kind of verse.
Halls of Montezuma.
Yeah, there you go. So, Kurt, one of the things I love about you is just your incredible knowledge of Scripture, and I mean that with all sincerity. So, what scriptures would you go to underline your sense of what service is and our mandate to serve the selfless for this other person, non-transactional, not getting something back kind of way?
Well, I would say, again, this is at the very core of who we are as followers of Jesus. And you probably would not be surprised that the Bible, especially the New Testament, is full of not just references or suggestions, but commands for those who would choose to follow Jesus to be ready to serve. Mark chapter 10 talks about the fact that even the Son of Man, referencing Jesus, did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. And so he said, in that vein, whoever wants to be first should be last. Who wants to be the greatest must be the servant of all. And as is so often the case, that's God's inverted economy of turning things upside down from the world's economy. And so our idea of what greatness is stands in direct opposition to what Jesus says God's idea of greatness is. All those years of being a youth minister, I would try to tell our students, first of all, I would tell them that they were going to be leaders. They had to memorize Philippians Chapter 2, that great passage that says, your attitude should be the same as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped or attained for his own benefit, but he made himself nothing. He goes on to say he took the very nature of a servant. And so I would give them examples of how they can serve. And so frequently going to camp or on a mission trip or whatever, just good old picking up trash, just good old picking up other people's trash quietly, not making a big deal, not trying to draw attention, but cleaning up somebody else's mess. A lot of our kids would work at Six Flags, and people would buy nachos or chili dogs, take a couple of bites, set them on the picnic table, and they would just bake in the sun. Or they'd spill a drink or a snow cone or something. And so those students working at Six Flags, I would tell them, don't do it for the money, that pittance that you're making minimum wage. Do it as unto the Lord. And if you can joyfully clean up somebody else's nasty nachos or half-eaten chili dog and not do it for attention, but do it as unto the Lord, you're beginning to get a sense of what servanthood is. And you really don't know what being a servant is until you're treated like one. And they're not paid, they're not applauded, they're not thanked, they're disrespected, they're presumed upon. And so I would say two things about service. It's about sacrifice and it's about attitude. Unless it really costs you something, it's not really service. And if you don't do it as unto the Lord and out of love, then there's really no point, because Scripture seems to make the point that your attitude, why you do something, is important as your action and what you actually do. And so just to reference 1 Corinthians 13, Paul starts off saying, you can preach with eloquence, you can give everything you have to the poor, you can give your body to be burned at the stake. But if you don't do it on love, you're wasting your time, you're wasting your money. And so the motivation, the intent, the attitude of what we do really is as important as what it is that we're doing. And it's not true service unless it costs us something.
Wow. Man, just think how good that would have been if he had prepared for tonight. I mean,
Buddy, we've been preparing I've been preparing 62 years for this.
I hope everybody that's out there knows that when I do a lot of the picking at everybody. First of all, I just like to have fun, and everything's usually funny to me. But man, I respect these people so much and just all that they bring, and we're really, really good friends. So if ever I misstep or misstate, I apologize, but it's not going to stop me.
No, and it's deserved.
Yeah, it's well deserved. So Dennis, one of the things that we have out in front of our church is this statue of the divine servant. You've referenced that this past week. You've referenced that many times, and it's iconic at our church now. It has become over the past few years. So what is Jesus? Kurt's referenced Philippians 2. He's referenced Jesus talking about being the least of these as a servant. What did Jesus mean by that? What did he do? What is the Jesus kind of servanthood? How did he model that?
Well, I think Jesus, basically in almost everything he did, was out of service to humanity and to the Father. Think about it. He's God the Son, so he's in existence in eternity, and he chooses to step out of that and clothe himself with human flesh and live with the limitations of humanity. That's to me the greatest example of servanthood is just what Christians call the incarnation, that he would be willing to walk on planet Earth and to live a life with these type of limitations is amazing to me. Usually our goal in life is to ascend to the place where we have fewer and fewer limitations. That's real freedom to us. Whereas Jesus chose the very opposite path, and he chose to surrender everything that he had on our behalf. So just the very presence of Jesus is an example of servanthood to me. And in some ways, I think that's what he meant when he said he didn't come to be served. He came to serve. He came to show us what it meant to surrender everything that he had on behalf of someone else. And it was to our benefit, like Katie mentioned a while ago. It's for someone else's benefit. And so, there's some practical things that Jesus did. I mean, my goodness, when these disciples are all gathered for this very formal meal, this celebration, this commemoration of what God had done for them in the past. And there was ceremonial preparation for that, but there was just practical preparation for it. In those days when those folks sat down to eat, they didn't sit at a table like we do in chairs. They reclined. And if you think about that, that meant that their feet were, even though they were pushed to the back, they were still adjacent and close to people who sat around them. And you're walking on dusty trails wearing sandals. And so it was just customary. And it was an act of hygiene and also just decorum, that your feet would be washed before you sat down and recline for a meal like that, particularly for the Passover. And as the disciples were making their way into Jerusalem for the Passover, they were concerned about who was going to be the greatest in this kingdom that Jesus was about to establish in their mind. And so when it came time for someone to wash the feet of everybody so they could actually recline and have this meal, no one would do it. And so in a very humbling way, Jesus just took up that towel. He took up that wash basin, and he took their feet in his hands, and he just started washing feet. And so this divine servant is just a depiction of that moment where Jesus is kneeled in front of Simon Peter. And here's this leader, this boisterous disciple, if you will. And Jesus is kneeling in front of him, and Peter says, "Wait a minute, you're not going to wash my feet." And once Jesus has this conversation with him that this is necessary, Peter is like, "Well, then wash my whole body." He didn't want to miss out. But Jesus what I love about what Jesus did was he just did things. He demonstrated things. Sometimes he said things, sometimes he talked about it. Sometimes he just did it. He served people. In Mark 1, when the leper, he encounters this leper and they have this conversation, all of a sudden Jesus just reaches out and touches him. Well, there are a million things you could do in a conversation with a leper, but touching them was not one of them. And it was just an act of servanthood to me. It's an identification with humanity. That's what made Jesus so special. And I think that is the embodiment of all of this. And I think about people in my own life that I've known through the years that model that for me. There are really many of them. I've had the privilege of living my life in the church, and I've just known so many servants. One guy comes to my mind. When I first started pastoring back in 1983, I pastored this little church in Oklahoma, Jimtown, Oklahoma, little country town. And,
I know the animal control officer up there.
Yeah, you do.
That's right. And just a small community, mostly peanut farmers. But we had a man in that church named F.S. Mapp. And the church didn't have a parsonage. And so Cindy and I would spend the night on Saturday nights. And so they put a sleeper sofa in one of the Sunday school rooms. And so Cindy and I, we slept in the church every Saturday night on that sleeper sofa. And the church didn't have a shower or anything. So we'd get up on Sunday morning and we'd drive down the road about a mile to one of the members' houses, and we'd take showers and get ready for church and then come back. And we had to clean our room up because we taught Sunday school in that room to the high school and college kids. So we had
Those were the days, Dennis.
Those were the days. Well, anyway, but what was interesting was F.S. Mapp every Sunday would come to the church. He would, I'm already there, but he would unlock the doors. He would, if it was cold, he would turn on the heaters. He would make sure all the chairs were set up in the sun. There weren't that many Sunday school classrooms, but we had Sunday school classrooms, and FS would make sure all the chairs were set up. If there was anything special going on, he would make sure that was taken care of. If there had been wind during the night that had blown limbs down in the little parking lot, he'd clean all the limbs out of the parking lot. He would, sweep off the front porch. I mean, and I'm not talking about like every once in a while. I'm talking about for the 2.5 years I was the pastor there, every single Sunday. I even said to him one day, I said, FS, Cindy and I are up here we are spending the night in the church. We can get up in the morning and unlock the building and we can do whatever. And he was like, and you would rob me of my service to the Lord, the humble thing I can do. He said, I don't know how to teach the Bible. I'm not very good at that, but I know how to serve my people and that I love and serve the church. He said, why would you take that away from me? Man, that was just you're talking about no glory. There was nothing in it for FS in terms of being recognized, but he did it. And you know what? Years later, as I've stayed in touch with that church, FS Mapp, he's still there. He's still one of those guys that's up there taking care of the church all these years later. Just when I think of servanthood, I feel like he's one of the guys whose picture's in the dictionary.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing? I was sitting here just as you guys have been talking. I usually write notes or look up to see what, and one of the things that is apparent that I guess I haven't really thought about before is people like F.S. Mapp have gained authority in people's lives because of their servanthood, not because they claimed it. That's Jesus had the right to self-aggrandize and the power and authority to do anything he wanted to for himself, but he didn't. And it's funny, as people, I'm going to speak for myself as a person, I tend to want to live above my station and get what's not even mine to get. I'd like to ride on Air Force One if I could, and that kind of stuff. But one of my favorite things is, I like history and reading and stuff. And I spent some time a couple years ago on George Washington, and one of my favorite stories about George Washington, and it may be apocryphal, but it's one of the stories that is written about him, was he was riding down a road as the commander-in-chief of the army, and a corporal was yelling at some men to move a giant log that had gotten in the way of a wagon that was trying to get down the road. And the corporal was yelling at the guys and berating them, and the General Washington, unbeknownst to the corporal, said, what are you doing? He goes, well, they're moving. He said, why aren't you helping them? He said, I'm the corporal. He said, I give the orders. And General Washington got down off his horse and helped them move the log. And the guy said, who are you? And he goes, well, I'm George Washington. Well, the guy almost dropped out. And he said, it's okay. I've done my duty. And as he was leaving, he told the corporal, the next time your men need help, he said, send for the commander-in-chief. I I just thought that was a pretty cool story. As you were talking, I was reminded about that story. I just looked it up again because I wanted to, but that's what he said to the guy. Wouldn't that be great if it was said of all of us that if we had all the authority in the world, but people that knew that they could come to us for help? A part of, Dennis, what I hear you saying is a part of servanthood is humility. That in all the scriptures that Kurt referenced, servanthood is linked to humility, or not claiming for yourself the things that you could rightfully claim. And let's talk just on that subject for a minute, because it seems to me that maybe servanthood isn't quite as lived out as it is because we're not humble enough to do the things that are before us to do. And I'm talking to me. I'm looking, I can see my face right here in the mirror, so I'm looking right at me when I'm saying that. So let's talk just a little bit about the dichotomy of servanthood and humility. How do those things interact? Kurt or Katie, how do those things interact?
Katie spoke last, so I'll let her go next.
Okay.
I would think it'd be very hard to be a good servant without being humble. I think that one's a prerequisite to the other, because I think pride would really get in the way of being able to do something selflessly. I mean, the nature of true servanthood, most of the great servants we know, we just see the tip of the iceberg. I mean, they do so many things not for their own glory, because it's the right thing to do, because they get the idea that that's just part of what it is to follow Jesus. And that's a humble thing. It's a right view of oneself in light of Christ. And if you don't have that, I don't know that you can serve well. You can do stuff, you can be active, but I think the motivator is probably, you're in your own way. I think if you're not humble, y'all could poke holes in that. You could prove me wrong, but I think that's right.
No, I think that's great. And going back to what you said, Kurt, about what you tried to live out and teach with the youth, and I've seen that in your life and your wife's life probably more than yours, just service and humility. But and if you don't know Kim, you need to, because that's the kind of life that she lives, is a service life. That's who she is. But this idea of humility, it's not the get dirty. I'm a poor me. I'm look at me, I'm struggling. I gave up all the money, and I'm wearing bad clothes so that you get. FS Map did stuff regardless of whether somebody was going to see him or not, and he didn't. Right. Even in telling the story about himself, he didn't choose to tell it because of his humility. So Kurt, going back to Jesus as a model in humility, what do you got to say?
Well, he is the model, and he hasn't just given us an example to follow. He's actually empowered us to do it. He's given us the very Spirit, the same Spirit that empowered him and raised him from the dead is available to us. And I think all of this that we're aspiring to, that we're admiring, is just a byproduct of living the Christian life. I think there's a sense in which the fruit of the Spirit is a natural outpouring of our identity in Christ. And so a follower of Jesus is much less concerned about his or her rights than about his or her responsibilities and opportunities to serve. Last week, we talked about forgiveness, and that forgiveness is not easy, but it's easier because we've been forgiven. We love because he loved us first. We've been loved first. Mm-hmm. And so watching Jesus model the kind of life he wants us to live isn't just left up to us to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps. We allow him to do that in us and through us, and it becomes more natural as we live into it. I would just say for us as paid professional holy people, according to Ephesians 4, our job in the church is to prepare God's people for works of service. And so we're supposed to be helping cultivate a whole church full of FSs who are living out their calling and just eager to serve. And I would say that service is important because it makes the Christian life tangible. I think it really puts into practice some of these ethereal, invisible kind of ideals that when you really begin to serve others in love in Jesus' name, it reinforces that identity. It helps make more tangible and concrete the reality of who you are in Christ. And so reading and reflecting on Scripture is the single most powerful catalyst for spiritual growth. In fact, I would say apart from reading and reflecting on Scripture, you're not really going to grow spiritually. But a powerful second is this idea to humble follower of Jesus, and allows you in very specific, real, tangible ways to be the salt and light that we're called to be as followers of Jesus.
So FS map, that could be faithful servant map there.
Faithful servant.
We ought to give out an FS map award, for faithful
That's
servant.
right.
So Dennis,
There's another part of servanthood that I think sometimes gets overlooked, but I think it's important. That is, if God has gifted you to do something, when you do that and use your gifts, well, that's also serving as well. I think sometimes we think service means we've got to go do something that we don't normally do. And man, it's been a long time since I've raked leaves. So tomorrow morning I'm going to go find somebody's house and rake leaves, but actually, and there's nothing wrong with that, but actually using your gifts, if something that you're good at serves the interest of the people of God or serves the community, do what you're good at. I remember reading a story years ago, James Michener, there was a family who knew him, and there was a lady that was friends with him, and she was running this nonprofit organization, and she went to Michener and said, I need you to write an article about my nonprofit that we want to send out. And he agreed to do it. He said, I'm happy to do that. And well, the time approached, and she reminded him. He said, yeah, I'm going to do that for you. And then they were getting close to the deadline, and he just dropped by our house, and he left an envelope, and she was pretty excited. And she opened the envelope, and he'd just written her a check. And so they were friends. So she went by his house, and he comes to the door, and he said, hey, what's going on? She said, I got your envelope. And he said, okay, I just didn't have time to get this article written, so I just went ahead and wrote you a check. And she said, well, I'm just going to give it back to you. She said, I can get a check from all kinds of people. You're the only person, though, that can write an article the way James Michener would write an article. So I'm just going to give you your check back. Well, the next day, she said she got up, and in her mailbox, there was another envelope with the article he had written that ended up in a whole lot of checks being given, to her cause. And the point was, he had a gifting. Well, using that gifting is also service. And so I think that there are things that we're all good at, that we can exercise those gifts. And if we do them in the right way, well, that's service too. It's really for the benefit of others that we have those gifts. And so
can I ask you a question? This may be a whole different Thursday Night Live. How does ministry differ from service?
Yeah, you should have submitted that question early so that we'd have time to think about it. Don't you think? No, that goes to Katie. That was one of Katie's questions, so she's ready for that.
If you want to submit that, we might consider that for next week, Kurt.
I just happen to have a microphone that's still working. No, because as you say that, it then makes me think, well, then what's ministry? Because sometimes I feel like there are nuances of words that we use a lot, and there may be similarities, but there also may be things that distinguish them. But you don't have to answer the question. That's fine.
I have to think about that. I don't know. What do you think, Katie? I mean, I think they're connected, though. I mean,
boss, can you unpack the Greek for us? I'm trying to. I don't know.
Doulos is a Greek word for servant, which in Greek means slave, and so that's a harsh.
Your wife has referenced that in the comments. If you want to tackle that one.
Oh, really?
She really has, yeah.
Okay, I didn't catch that.
You can count on Cindy Wiles to throw the hard ball.
She throws down the hard questions, doesn't she?
Yeah.
And I think that the word for ministry is more connected to just the expression of what God has given you. But doulos, means slave, and I mean like a bond servant. So they're different words in the New Testament. So I guess that probably would highlight the difference between them. But man, I need to think about that. But I think they're connected though, because in some ways, I guess you could say, well, there are ministries of service, which I guess is true. But I don't know. I'm gonna have to think about that for a little bit.
That's a good question.
Because again, I think, and obviously I had a reason for asking. Because I feel like a lot of times as we use our spiritual gifts, or those talents that God has given us. It is for the building up of the body, for the expansion of the gospel and all. And we sometimes use maybe the word ministry if it's a little more high and holy and sacred in our evaluation, whereas the word service does have the connotation of more of that earthy, mundane, kind of thankless sacrifice to it. But I don't know that that's necessarily always the case.
Yeah. Like I said, I won't have to think about that because, so often, the word diakonos, it's ministry, but God, don't we think it hasn't? Don't we think within diakonos is the whole idea of service and servanthood?
Absolutely.
I know there's different words, but yeah.
In my mind, I don't know if this is a real difference or just what I'm trying to do to parse it. Ministry is more of the doing, and service is more of the attitude. You use ministry. And especially in Great Britain and that kind of stuff, everything is the ministry of, and that's the seeing to things, and that's the actual
Cindy
carrying
Wiles
out.
just said that in the comments.
Huh?
Cindy Wiles just said that in the comments too.
Oh, hey.
I tell you what, she might just
Cindy
be
Wiles is the pastor's
on this
wife, but
screen.
I'm going to tell you, she is the brains behind the authority. She is the heart behind this thing, man.
Sorry,
but when you talk about ministration and doing the thing, sometimes you can minister and not necessarily have a servant's heart about it, and so. I don't know, just a thought. Well, let me skip to something else here because I wanted to. Kurt said something earlier that contextualized ministry, and a really good question. One of our people is asking, so how do those of us who live alone and are of the age that we're told to stay in serve during this pandemic? So just in a broader sense, what is service? Why is it an important topic right now, and how do we live out service in this weird world? That's a great question.
Well,
Sandy, I'm gonna give that to Sandy Potts right there.
well done, Sandy. Well, Sandy knows because she's lived it her whole life. There's a ministry of prayer that I think is a service that's hard to beat, and so it's not just cliche. It's true that the ministry of prayer is as profound and powerful as anything else could do. Also, contacting people during this time, and that can be social media, that can still be a telephone, that can be a personal note. There are any number of ways of doing it, but it just means so much to people to know that someone's thinking about them and praying for them, praying with them. Praying with people on the phone is a very powerful thing to do, and I would encourage you to do that as often as the opportunity presents itself.
Yeah, and I think, contacting people, checking on people right now is very important. People are, they feel isolated. And so, just calling, writing notes to people and actually mailing them. I've gotten several cards in the mail in the last few days, and I've been surprised in my reaction to it, of how encouraging it is to me. Why is it so encouraging to me that somebody has just written me a note? Well, I don't know. Right now, that feels like such a personal touch, And so if you're isolated yourself, if you're alone, my goodness, you can pray, you can contact people, you can write people. I just think there are ways for you to invest yourself in ministry or in servanthood.
We don't know.
So,
we can't know.
Whichever one of those we're going to determine is right.
You won't be wrong to pick one and just do it. That's okay.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Yeah, that's true. And so I think too, just caring for people, man, right now, my goodness. And sometimes that's picking up the phone and calling and listening and caring for people. Right now, I think personal touch right now is a great act of service, to be honest with you, in the era we're in right now. People are hungry for those personal touches. There's so much of this right here going on, and I'm not bemoaning this right here. I said last night in the thing I sent out to the church, online is really lifeline right now. And that's true. Man, the personal touch right now is so powerful to me. It's amazing how it touches me. And so I'm just reminded of the beauty of it. So that'd be one of my encouragements.
I got a call today from a hospice chaplain who wanted us to know about one of our church members. And so called and had a great visit with the church member and all. And then I just called this guy back to let him know that I had done what he had asked us to do. And he was so moved because he says, no one ever calls me back. You know, I have all these conversations. I tell people what's going on, blah, but no one ever calls back to tell me what happened. And it was just the most, and it was a simple thing to me. It was really for me, just kind of a closure, but it was so meaningful to him. And so we can sometimes underestimate how powerful just a simple phone call or just a text, or to your point, taking the time to actually write a personal note, and how God can speak through that and affirm. And so often it comes just at the right time for somebody who's just really struggling, really having a hard time. And it's just an answer to prayer. And you may be the answer to somebody's prayer when you do that.
You know, it's funny that you say that. There's a young adult in our church, and this has been a little while ago, but I got this random note from her, and it was just a little card, and it said, you know, Dr. Wiles, you know, I miss seeing you. Just a quick word of thanks, of, you know, for your preaching and whatever. And she had put in a $5 gift card to the bookstore. She said something like, I know how much you love books, you love to read, and just wanted to give this to you. And my goodness, y'all, I almost started crying, to be honest with you, when I read that, because I thought, you know, she didn't have to give me anything, you know what I mean? But it was a tangible statement from her, and to me, it was a service to me, you know, that she knows how much I love to read and study, and so I don't know, just that kind of stuff goes a long way right now, man. You know, it just does.
Katie, what are you thinking? What you've listened? How does this intersect our world today?
Well, oh my gosh, I think if we could just do it, we could change our world. I just dropped a quote in our little private chat. I don't know. It's kind of long, but I think it sums up.
We have a private chat.
Oh, I found it.
It's so long. I thought if there's a way Andy can get on the screen, or it's very simple, but I think it does. I'm not saying we're wrapping up, but it's just a really good definition of service. And it says, service is a way of offering resources, time, treasure, influence, and expertise for the care, protection, justice, and nurture of others. Acts of service give hand to the second greatest commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. And I think that's, so it's, I mean, the definition is all encompassing. It's basically like offering all that you are, all that you have, all you could do. Thank you, Andy. I knew he could do it.
Look, there it is.
But it's so good. And this is a book about spiritual disciplines that I've been reading with the college students. And it's really about serving being an act of discipline. You discipline yourself to get better in these ways. But that it's so connected to the second commandment that we're talking about, how do you serve in this Corona time? How would you like to receive love and companionship and service in this time? Think through that, and then maybe find some ways to do that for your neighbors. That's loving your neighbor as yourself. I think that's really, so how does this intersect with our world? All that to say, if we could go out and find ways to love our neighbors as ourselves in the same ways that we might really be craving that kind of community or service, if we can find ways to do that for the people just right around us, then we'll be, I think, following Jesus the best we can do. And that's all anybody else knows.
Some of what you're talking about right now, Katie, I'm just thinking, again, I have a tendency to apply all this stuff to myself as I'm listening and just trying to find where the cracks are in my own life and that kind of thing. You know, one of the things that occurs to me is one of the acts of service right now is attitude. With all that's going on, racial concerns, the cynicism about government, and you know, just all the things that are going on. Part of the act of service, it's not whether you're for it or against it, but it's how you enter discourse. It's how you communicate. It's how you are able to share ideas even when people aren't on the same page. with you, and so don't underestimate that as well, especially in this day and age of being able to tweet. And I read an article yesterday talking about in the which this may or may not be a good thing for our leaders, but in British government, the Queen has said that none of her people can tweet without somebody else reading it. That was my understanding of what I read. And so what that means is in the moment, you can't make a decision and just hit send. You can't send out 144 or 250 characters or whatever it is anymore. And, I just thought one of the things that we can do is guard what we say and what we do and the attitudes that we have whenever we're entering into, again, this weird time where probably more of us than ever have been are on Facebook or social media. There's acts of humility and kindness and servanthood out there in the virtual world as well. So one of the things I think he's probably going to end up being my son-in-law. I'm not quite sure.
Can you say that on the air?
What?
Can you just say that on the air?
Yeah, you can. I mean, they're talking about it. My daughter Mackenzie and her beau.
Stuff happens.
I'm out.
No pressure.
Okay. Yeah.
Hold on. I'm tweeting this out. I'm tweeting this out right now. Katie, would you
run it by the
this
Queen,
tweet?
though. Run it by the Queen.
Okay, boom.
One of the things that he's grown up and he's brought to our house as a saying is, don't talk about it, be about it. And all of this stuff, it's easy to talk about. It's harder to be about it. And so I would just encourage all of us. Kurt said earlier on, God even has to give us the grace to live humbly, to live out acts of service, because that's not our broken nature. That's not even who we are apart from him. And so don't beat yourself up too bad if your natural tendencies aren't to be servanthood livers and service people, because that's not naturally who we are in this broken world. We need Jesus to help be that. We need Jesus to help us be the salt and the light, and not the vinegar or the oil. And so just a thought about that. Again, don't try to grit your teeth and be all of these things that we're talking about. It doesn't work that way. God gives us grace and mercy and power to do all of the things that he's asked us to do. You don't have to bust yourself up. God gives you the power to do what he's asking you to do. So, yeah, and I'm sorry, Mackenzie is probably going to kill me. But she talked about it too. I mean, so yeah, forget that. I don't care.
One thing, talk to your dad about it. It's another thing for your dad to tell the whole world.
Yeah. No, I said maybe. I'm not poisoning it. Katie, am I wrong?
Here we go.
Yeah, that was wrong to do.
Was it really wrong? Golly. Okay. Well, I apologize. I'm gonna apologize. I spent half my time getting in trouble. I spent half my time getting in trouble, and the other 3/4
getting out of it. Yeah.
Well, this is really good tonight, man. It just helps so much to hear your all's views on things that I know are right to do, and sometimes getting back to the roots of who we are. And Dennis, especially this one another thing that you've been going through to help us all to think about these things that we all may be doing. Man, thank you. Thanks for your wisdom. And Kurt, Katie, as always, man, you just add so much to my life. There's just so much richness, because I know it's not just about getting ready for a 30-minute thing. It's about the way you live your lives, and I appreciate that so much. And I'm sure Mackenzie will be on the phone with you at some point tonight, Katie. So
I look forward to it.
Yeah, help her to have a humble heart and be a servant unto me.
Sure.
Well, for all of you that were out there, we got some really good input tonight. I hope you were reading along, and we didn't get to every question, but I think we tried to touch on virtually everything that I saw here. You can see down below questions, comments, suggestions, prayers, needs. If you'll email us at tnl@fbca.org, we would love to hear from you, and we'll route those to the right places. If you want to get into discussion with either of us tonight, I'll make sure that it gets to the right people. And as always, we have worship at 9:30. We have Bible study opportunities. You can go online at fbca.org, First Baptist Church Arlington.org, and see who we are. There's all kinds of helps. We have a counseling center. Mission Arlington is a part of the ministry of our church. If you need help with physical needs, if you have spiritual needs, and we want to help with that. So we really do have a full orb of things that we would bring as service to you. We want to be servants to you, and know that it's not transactional. We're not expecting you to trade membership or money or a tithe for what you get here. We're standing here because we believe that Christ has asked us to be servants, and we want to minister to you. So I work both those words in. We want to be servants, and we want to minister to
Amen.
you. Well, like us, subscribe to us. If you heard something tonight that was especially meaningful to you, send the link, because they can watch it again, and it shows up on our Facebook page. It's on our website. You can get to it. So thank you tonight. Katie, thank you as always. Love you guys. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Kurt. And blessings upon you out there in this world. Any final words from anybody? Anybody? Katie?
The only thing that counts is faith expressing itself in love.
Thanks, Kurt.
Galatians 6:9.
That's
Great
good.
way to
Amen.
start. Thanks. Blessings to everybody. Thank you all.